Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the mother of this 13-year-old girl who took her own life says she holds NHS Tayside responsible for her daughter's death.
The warning signs were there and, in my view, should have been picked up on by professionals that are in this every single day.
Also on the programme, almost a quarter of eligible NHS patients aren't being treated within the legally binding timescale of 12 weeks. The family of this former Glasgow rugby player who died during the Singapore triathlon says he was left for over 20 minutes in the water before help arrived. Alec McLeish calls on his young squad to prove they have what it takes as they prepare for their friendly against Peru. And it's curtain up on the family of impresarios who brought acts like this to Scotland's theatres in the heyday of the music hall. Good evening. The mother of a teenage girl who took her own life says she holds NHS Tayside responsible. Sophie Parkinson was 13. Her mother believes Sophie would still be alive today if she'd received a good standard of care. The Health Board, who've commissioned an independent inquiry into mental health services across the region, say they can't comment on the case. Stephen Godden reports.
That was us just when we'd moved into our other house.
4 years ago, Ruth Moss lost her daughter Sophie, having struggled for years with mental health problems. One night, at the age of just 13, she took her own life.
I've kept in contact with her friends' mums, her friends. I watched them grow up. I watched them learn to drive. I watched them go to university. And my child will never have that opportunity. And she was a very clever girl.
For 6 years, Sophie was in the care of NHS Tayside's child and adolescent mental health services. As she got worse, she self-harmed. Twice she tried to kill herself. Her case, Ruth says, was never referred to anyone more senior than a trainee psychologist.
Sophie was let down by a service that didn't take her seriously and didn't take me seriously. The warning signs were there and, in my view, should have been picked up on by professionals that are in this every single day.
Do you think if CAMHS had dealt with the situation differently that Sophie would still be alive?
I'm absolutely sure of that. I hold Tayside, NHS Tayside, responsible for Sophie's death.
Ruth, herself a nurse, is also angry about the investigation that followed Sophie's death.
NHS Tayside investigate NHS Tayside. Well, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And there seems to be a flaw in that right from the start.
NHS Tayside say their thoughts are with Sophie's family, but that legal action means they can't comment. As work continues to set up an independent inquiry into mental health services across the region, Ruth says the lessons of her daughter's death must be learned.
So I'll never get over it. I think most people would realise that. And keep going every day. And fighting for better services for young people.
Stephen Godden, Reporting Scotland.
A quarter of eligible NHS patients aren't being treated within a legally binding timescale of 12 weeks. New data shows in the first 3 months of this year, nearly 17,000 patients waited longer than this. That's the worst since the treatment time guarantee was introduced in 2012. Our health correspondent Lisa Summers has been looking at the figures and they are of some concern, Lisa, not least if you're the one that's waiting.
Well, that's right. If you're ill or in pain and you're told that you need to begin some kind of treatment, you can imagine that the wait is a particularly anxious one and a worrying one for many people. And in part, that's why the government made it a legal requirement of health boards to treat everybody that needs that treatment, either as an inpatient or a day patient, within the first 3 months. But what we're seeing over a period of time is an increase in the number of people who are waiting longer than that 12-week period to begin treatment. So, for example, the figures that we have today that take us up to the start of March of this year show that 1 in 4 patients are having to wait more than that 12-week period. But if you rewind to March 2013, 5 years ago, well, that figure was just under 1 in 50 were waiting more than 12 weeks. So they do make quite disturbing reading. But I think what we're seeing is actually a trend that has been happening for some time, and perhaps an indication of the pressures on health boards where the majority of waiting time targets are not being met.
And what's being done to get these figures down?
Well, there isn't any specific sanction for health boards that aren't meeting the targets, but the government do say that they will help support those who are struggling most. They also point to the fact that the average waiting time to be seen is 8 weeks. And yesterday they announced that they would make an extra £50 million of funding available to help get waiting times down. Now, most of that, or the majority of that, will be spent in specialist areas. So, for example, if they can speed up the time it takes to get key diagnostic tests, then maybe they can get you down that journey for treatment more quickly. But it is hard to see any significant reversal in this trend anytime soon.
Lisa Summers, thank you very much. The family of a former rugby player who died during a triathlon says he was left for more than 20 minutes in the water before help arrived. 42-year-old Steve Begley, who played for Glasgow Hawks and Glasgow Accies, died during the Singapore International Triathlon last September. An inquest into his death is ongoing. Katie Hunter reports.
Steve Begley emerging from the water after lap 1 of the swim leg. Cheered on by friends who had no idea they'd never see him again. Shortly after this was filmed, Steve got into difficulty. He was recovered about 200 metres from the shoreline. Steve's family had no idea he had an undiagnosed heart condition. He died of cardiorespiratory failure.
You've got a stranger ringing you from the other side of the world, ringing you to tell you that your brother's just passed away, and you literally take it as read. Followed them by having to probably do the worst phone call in my life, and having to ring my parents and some of their good friends to make sure there was a support network there for my mum and dad, who are into their early 70s now.
Steve played rugby for teams around the world, including Glasgow Hawks and Glasgow Accies. The 42-year-old was taking part in the Singapore International Triathlon for charity. His family says data taken from his sports watch shows he was left in the water for too long before help arrived. This speeded up black dot shows Steve moving round the swim course, but then he suddenly stops and appears to be stationary for more than 20 minutes.
Looking at the number of lifeguards they had on duty, was 6 lifeguards on station plus 2 jet skis on a 750-metre course. If you say 10 metres wide, that's a grid of 7,500 square metres. All I'd say is that seems to me to be a lot of water for 6 plus 2 to cover.
The Triathlon Association of Singapore said it sanctioned the race in accordance with International Triathlon Union's guidelines on safety protocols. A spokesperson added, "We are currently assisting the relevant authorities in their investigations. It is premature to comment any further on the incident at this moment." Steve's family don't know whether he would have survived had help arrived sooner, but they're forever left wondering, what if? Katie Hunter, reporting Scotland.
The Rangers chairman, Dave King, has called on the chairman of the Scottish Professional Football League to be suspended pending an independent investigation. As well as his SPFL role, Murdo McLennan is also a non-executive director of a company part-owned by the Celtic major shareholder Dermot Desmond. But the SPFL tonight say no investigation is warranted. Well, let's get more now from Ibrox and Jonathan Sutherland.
Another day, another statement in Scottish football, Jackie. This time, the Rangers chairman, Dave King, calling for the suspension of Murdo McLennan. Now, he's the chairman of the SPFL. Rangers want an investigation over the fact that he's also a non-executive director of a company called the Independent News and Media, an Irish-based company. And here's the rub, it's part-owned by the Celtic majority shareholder, Dermot Desmond. In Dave King's statement, he says, it's important that any conflicts of interest, or even the perception of such, whereby positions within the Scottish football authorities could be undermined or abused, must be aggressively rooted out of our game. Now, this is the second statement from Dave King in the space of a week, where he's called for somebody to be suspended. The last one was Gary Hughes, who's on the SFA board. It's after quotes emerged from Gary Hughes in which he referred to Rangers fans as the great unwashed.
And what's the SPFL been saying?
Well, basically, Jackie, the SPFL tonight are holding firm on their position. They don't want to see their chairman suspended. They say that he was basically appointed at the start of this year and that everything was disclosed and nobody brought this up at the time. And they say, to be definitive, a non-executive position on a PLC does not constitute a business relationship between that individual and a minority shareholder in the company, and therefore no investigation is warranted. For the moment, Jackie, it's a case of watch this space.
Jonathan Sutherland at Ibrox, thank you. Wildfires will pose a continuing risk until Thursday. That warning came as firefighters in the north of Scotland finally brought 3 separate outbreaks under control. A man has been reported to the Procurator Fiscal in connection with one of the heath fires on Skye. Jackie O'Brien can tell us more.
Communities in the West Highlands have been feeling the heat a little bit too literally over the past few days, with wildfires in Torridon and here in Strathcarron. Helicopters have been brought in to waterbomb the affected areas as the public is told to act responsibly in the dry, sunny conditions.
Given the current weather conditions on the west coast of Scotland just now, I'd just like to urge anybody who's thinking of having a bonfire, barbecue, or even just smoking, just be careful with how you discard of any heated embers. Make sure everything's out, because the ground in the West Highlands today is absolutely tinder dry, and the weather forecast for the next few days is continued dry weather with winds which will only fan any flames that are lit.
It took firefighters almost 12 hours to bring this blaze near Slichagan on Skye under control. A man's been reported to the Procurator Fiscal in connection with the outbreak. This spell of glorious weather is bringing more of us out into the countryside. But while moorland like this may look inviting, its extremely dry heather and vegetation fuels fires. Fires that could threaten people, property and wildlife.
It can be devastating for wildlife. I mean, not only do animals and birds get burnt, I mean, especially this is nesting time, so those nests just get burnt out. And then the real danger is if it's a very hot fire, it then burns down into the peat, which is vegetation, and those fires can burn in the peat for weeks, months afterwards, and that is the really scary bit. And those fires can erupt again at all sorts of odd times.
With a warning of a continuing risk until Thursday, the authorities are reminding the public that most wildfires are preventable. Jackie O'Brien reporting Scotland, Inverness.
The Scottish Conservative leader is calling for more migrants to come to Scotland in an effort to boost the economy. Now, that echoes the plan set out by the SNP's Growth Commission last week. Ruth Davidson's position contradicts UK government policy, which is for lower levels of immigration. Well, our political correspondent Andrew Kerr is at Glasgow University, where Ms Davidson is making the speech. What's she been saying, Andrew?
Yes, Jackie, Ruth Davidson is speaking in the grand surroundings of the Bute Hall just now, saying that UK government policy to cut net migration down to tens of thousands simply isn't working, and it's time for a review. She says it's been there for 9 years and the target has never been met. She wants to create a dynamic economy here in Scotland with more people moving here. And that indeed echoes what the SNP-inspired Growth Commission said last week. We'll hear from the Scottish Government's Finance Secretary, Derek Mackay, in just a second. But this is what Ruth Davidson was telling me earlier.
It's time for a review. I think that immigration should be UK-wide, and one of the things that I do argue about encouraging more immigrants to come to Scotland is the idea that in terms of overseas immigration to the UK, Scotland gets far less than its share. We've got 8.3% of the population, but only 5.5% of people that come to this country want to come to Scotland for whatever reason. So let's make ourselves a more dynamic economy. Let's encourage more immigrants to come to Scotland.
Our goal must be for Scotland to become the most talent-friendly country in the world. So while the Commission's report is, first and foremost, a report to my party, I believe its tone and recommendations on immigration reflect a consensus that includes the majority of our country and, I hope, this chamber.
So, Jackie, Derek Mackay there speaking about consensus. So, consensus to grow Scotland's economy, but different goals, one of independence and one, of course, of the Union. And, of course, tax breaks were offered to migrants to come to Scotland in the Growth Commission. But Ruth Davidson says taxes in Scotland are too high at the moment. Jackie.
Andrew, thank you. A man who died after jumping into water at a quarry in East Ayrshire has been named locally as Mark O'Brien. The 28-year-old was pulled from water at Craigie Hill Quarry near Kilmarnock last night. Standard Life is to return as much as £1.75 billion to its shareholders after the sale of its European insurance business. The new firm was formed through the merger of Standard Life and Aberdeen Asset Management last summer. It said it was left with a surplus capital after selling off its insurance group, allowing it to return cash to investors. It's 16 minutes to 7, a reminder now of tonight's main story. The mother of a teenage girl who took her own life says she holds NHS Tayside responsible for her daughter's death. And still to come, former Aberdeen captain Willie Miller pays tribute to former teammate Neil Cooper, who died yesterday, aged 54. Now, prompted by footage like this of a whale struggling with plastic, many of us seem much more aware of the damage we cause to the environment. Well, after decades of campaigns to encourage recycling, it seems the message is now getting through. The latest figures show recycling is up while waste to landfill is down. Our environment correspondent Kevin Keane reports.
Well, these are big, broad figures that look at the commercial waste sector as well as what we throw away domestically, and they appear to show that we are now starting to get the message about the impact that recycling can have on the environment. The latest figures from SEPA, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, show that we recycled 61% of our waste in 2016, and that's a significant increase on the previous year. And it's actually not that far off our target long term to get 70% of our waste recycled by 2025. So what that means is that even less of our waste is now going to landfill, about 32.5% of it in 2016. We're doing particularly well on things like plastics and glass and paper and cardboard, but we're some considerable way off the long-term target, which is to bring it down to less than 5% by 2025. We've also seen a fall in the total amount of waste generated. 10.8 million tonnes of it in 2016. That's about 500,000 tonnes less than the previous year. But that figure has been going up one year and down the next for several years now. So it looks as though while our recycling rates are going up, the total amount of waste that we're consuming over the longer term is broadly staying the same.
Kevin Keane there. Sport now. Alec McLeish has urged his inexperienced Scotland squad to show a strong mentality as they take on Peru in Lima in the early hours of tomorrow morning. A number of key players have called off for that game and for another against Mexico. They're being used by the hosts as World Cup warm-up matches. From Lima, here's our senior football reporter, Chris McLaughlin.
The Peruvian capital is home to a very British bear. But Paddington's guests are very much Scottish. Each one here with a tale to tell about their travels.
Flew from Glasgow to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Panama City to here, to Peru, to Lima.
Is it all going to be worth it?
I hope so, aye. Just look around the town and everywhere, everybody's up for it. You know, they've got a great feeling because they're going to the World Cup.
I think it could be a long 90 minutes for Scotland.
They're going to give us a bit of a whipping, I think.
Well, hands up if you disagree. But call-offs mean it is a very inexperienced squad, something not lost on their manager.
The players need a strong mentality because a lot of them maybe haven't experienced something like this before, to come to South America and play in front of a full stadium, a stadium that will make noise from first minute of the game to the very last.
He's not kidding, this was the crowd for a national team training session. World Cup fever has gripped the nation heading for the finals in Russia.
We're not coming to be part of a party when they're leaving and stuff like that. We were coming for our own preparations for trips away and games upcoming, so we're not here to be making up numbers, and we're wanting to go with everything and give a good account of ourselves.
This is the Estadio Nacional, where in a few hours' time, around 45,000 Peruvians will pack this place out for a World Cup party. Scotland's patchwork squad will be doing its very best to spoil it, but in reality, it's a mammoth task ahead of an even tougher test in Mexico. Chris McLaughlin reporting Scotland in Lima.
Well, staying with football, the former Aberdeen captain, Willie Miller, has paid tribute to Neil Cooper, who died yesterday at the age of 54. Miller, who played alongside Neil Cooper when Aberdeen won the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1983, said he was a huge personality who will be sadly missed. Rebecca Curran has more.
As the sun shone on Pittodrie today, the flag flew at half-mast, marking a dark day for Aberdeen Football Club. Tributes from friends and fans left for Dons legend Neil Cooper, who died in hospital yesterday, aged 54, after collapsing at the weekend.
Really sad. Sorry. Real. It's just like part of my teenage years. It's just a big loss to the club.
And the goal is there! A Gothenburg great, Cooper played for Aberdeen during the glory years. He was just 19 when the team lifted the European Cup Winners' Cup in '83 after beating Real Madrid. His famous sense of humour evident as he revealed his performance wasn't memorable for one fan.
And he kept telling me about how football, and this was going on all night. And then he turned to me and said, "Did you go to Gothenburg?" And I said, "What?" "Did you go to Gothenburg?" I says, "Aye." He says, "How did you get there? Ferry or plane?" I says, "I was playing."
During his career, Cooper managed Ross County, Peterhead, Hartlepool United and Gillingham.
He was an extremely popular man, footballer. He had a great sense of humour. He made people laugh, but most importantly, he was a fantastic footballer.
Here scoring the fourth and final goal for the Dons in the 1982 Scottish Cup final against Rangers. He also played for Rangers and Ross County, a talented teammate and a great friend.
What you didn't want to do, of course, was catch his eye in the dressing room when Sir Alec was having one of his moments, because you knew then that it would be very difficult to keep a straight face. Just a magnificent person, a wonderful footballer. We spent many amazing moments together, lifting trophies, the Cup Winners' Cup, the Super Cup, league titles. He'll be sadly missed.
Neil Cooper, who died yesterday. Now, the first half of the 20th century was a golden era for variety theatre, and one Scottish family was at the heart of it. The Collins family owned a number of theatres in Glasgow, Dundee, Edinburgh and Aberdeen, and scoured the world for acts to fill them. From Lofty the Giant to the 10-Brained Woman. Our arts correspondent Pauline McLean reports.
This is the story behind the scenes of the colourful world of the Collins Variety Agency.
3 generations of one Scottish family, running theatres, creating shows and bringing variety to Scotland.
Lofty was Jan van Albert, the tallest man in the world. He was from Brussels, and they brought him over and toured him quite extensively, and he had a little portmanteau case that he would take on stage, and he would open it up and out would come Sepitone, the smallest man in the world, and would sit on Lofty's shoulder for the duration of the performance. And my father remembers meeting Lofty when he had first arrived in Glasgow. My father was about 4, I think, at the time, so for a 4-year-old to meet a man who was 7'2" must have been amazing.
The Collins Agency closed its doors in the 1960s, television and cinema taking their toll.
Singing monkey see and monkey do.
But many believe that the appetite for variety theatre remains strong, especially in Glasgow.
They like to laugh with a bunch of other people around them. They like to heckle with somebody else backing their heckle up with another heckle. They love it. It's a very, very engaging way to watch any kind of entertainment, is to watch it with an audience. And that's why variety will never die in Glasgow.
Children's writer Ross Collins has more reason than most to want to share the story. He's the great-grandson of Fred Collins, who started the whole agency.
My family were very much behind the scenes. They were the people who built these acts, who wrote the pantomimes, who produced the scenery and the costumes and all of that, but their faces were never in front of the curtain. And it's so nice to get their story out there and for people to actually know who was responsible for a lot of that.
Polly McLean, reporting Scotland.
Good fun. You can see the Collins Variety Agency on BBC Two Scotland tonight at 9 p.m. Christopher Blanchet, follow that.
Well, let's let Mother Nature follow it. Plenty of variety in our weather today, Jackie. Warmest day of the year so far.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much.
Good.
Hello there. Take a look at this picture. It is the Isle of Harris, looking more like the Caribbean. In fact, we reached 27.5 degrees through the Highlands today, but if you had the low cloud, what a different feel. Really quite chilly, especially in the capital, just 14 Celsius through the afternoon. Through this evening, some sunshine for many of us, and then overnight, that familiar pattern of low cloud just pushing in around these North Sea coasts. Perhaps a few showers towards Shetland, but elsewhere dry and 9 to 12 Celsius. So, tomorrow we have high pressure to the north, low pressure to the south, and the air mass start to become fairly unstable, so that means the chance of some showers. Most of them tomorrow really across Orkney and Shetland. Some low cloud to start the day for eastern coast. That burns back, so some sunshine by mid-morning, and then through the afternoon, normal level cloud coming through, giving us an east-west split. So, tomorrow afternoon in the west, once again, dry, fine, warm and sunny. Temperatures in the mid-20s. Come further east, pleasant enough, but fairly cloudy, certainly across parts of the southeast. Some sunshine towards parts of Tayside. Bit of medium-level cloud there through parts of Aberdeenshire and Murray, in towards the Murray Firth. And there's those showers once again, chiefly for Shetland, perhaps one or two passing through Orkney. Rest of the afternoon into the evening, some areas of cloud pushing their way in from the east coast. Again, the odd spot of light rain or drizzle. And Thursday, it's probably a fairly cloudy day across the board, actually, so a very different feel towards the west and northwest. Still pleasant enough, temperature-wise, up to around 20 or 21 Celsius, but sunshine more limited. And then looking ahead towards Friday, we have some fairly heavy downpours on the way coming up from the near continent with a humid feel. So torrential downpours are likely almost anywhere, really. Temperatures by mid-afternoon, anything up to around 23 Celsius, but these heavy thundery downpours moving their way northwards, potentially causing some difficult conditions on the roads where they occur. That's the forecast for now.
Thank you very much, Christopher. And now a reminder of tonight's main news. A gunman has shot dead 3 people, including 2 female police officers, in a suspected terror attack in the Belgian city of Liège. The attacker also took a cleaner hostage at a school before being killed in a shootout with police. The man's motive is not yet clear, but security services are treating the incident as terrorism. And that's Reporting Scotland. We're back at 10:30. Until then, from everyone on the team, have a good evening. Bye-bye.